The Winter War by Priscilla Shirer with Gina Detweiler. Chapter 9, Difficult Gifts. That was a close one. The words were out of Evan's mouth before he even realized where he was. Usually after coming through the water, the prince warriors arrived in the cave, where Ruach would meet them and give them instructions from the book, which had been written by the source of all life, all truth, and all wisdom. But Evan wasn't in the cave this time. He was in the Garden of Red. That was pretty strange, all by itself. Then he saw that Brianna and Manuel were also in the garden. They were wearing their armor as he was, but without their helmets and swords. From the looks on their faces, they assumed they had been through the same terrifying experience he had. That was the worst, said Brianna, still breathless from the experience. I've never been so scared in my entire life. Me neither, Manuel added, his voice raspy. The forest? Asked Evan. Brianna and Manuel both nodded. I didn't think I'd ever get out of there, Evan confessed, if it weren't for that bird. You saw the bird too? Asked Manuel. Evan nodded. I did too, said Brianna, but then it disappeared. I thought I'd gone the wrong way and my feet froze to the ground. Mine too, said Evan. I had to jump out of my shoes. So did I, said Manuel. But I didn't see either of you guys there, said Evan. How could we have been the same place and not seen each other? Beats me, said Brianna. But anything can happen in a horror toss. Evan spun around. Did you hear that? He peered up into the branches of a tree behind him. Maybe it was just the wind, Brianna said, her voice quivering a little. What wind? There's no wind here, said Manuel. Oh, I'm sure it's nothing, Brianna said. Warriors. The three kids jumped at the voice. They turned to see Ruach striding toward them down the garden path. His face, as usual, was invisible inside the hood, but his voice was lighter than it had been the last time, not nearly as ominous. You're wondering why I called you here? Only you three? Sort of, said Evan. I have something for each of you. Follow me. The three children followed Ruach down a new path, to a part of the garden none of them had seen before. It looked just as dead and barren as the rest. Ruach stopped suddenly, reached down, and picked up a smooth gray rock. He handed it to Evan. This is for you. A rock? Evan stared at the gift, mystified. It looked like a plain old rock, but it fit perfectly in his palm and felt comfortingly warm. For me? Wow, you shouldn't have. The other two kids chuckled a little, but Ruach did not make a sound. Evan cleared his throat and tried again. Thanks, I guess. What's it for? It is a stone of remembrance. Okay, so what am I supposed to remember? Me? You? The hood nodded slightly. That's it? I mean, I don't think I actually need a rock to help me remember you. You're pretty memorable. Keep it all the same, said Ruach. You may take your gift back to your world with you, just as Xavier did with his gift. Don't lose it. Evan saw Ruach's hood focused on him. Evan swallowed. He had once thrown away a gift that Ruach had given him. He would never do that again. I won't, he said. Ruach turned away and continued quickly down yet another path. The kids were beginning to realize that the garden was a lot bigger than they had thought. They came upon a small pool of water. The water was so clear and still that it reflected everything above it perfectly, like a mirror. At least it's not frozen, said Evan. Ruach put one of his shining hands into the water, which trembled at his touch. He pulled something out and turned to Manuel. Hold out your hands. Manuel did, and Ruach placed a wet, brownish lump into them. It looked like a small, misshapen potato. Manuel looked from the lump to Ruach, his eyes narrowing. A flower bulb? He said. Ruach nodded. It looks a bit like a water lily bulb. Exactly, said Ruach. He swiftly turned and started moving again, gliding over the dirt path as if his feet never touched the ground, as if he had no feet at all. The three kids scrambled to keep up. They were getting tired when Ruach finally stopped again under a large tree. He bent down and picked up one of the stringy, tangled roots that stuck up from the ground. He snapped it off and gave it to Brianna, who looked at it with disappointment etched on her face. A root? That's almost as nice as a rock, Evan said under his breath. These gifts mean something unique to each of you. You will soon discover that meaning, if you are patient and you listen carefully. But what about the others, said Brianna. Levi and Xavier and Ivy and Finn? Do not concern yourself with the gifts of others. A light fell upon them as if from a distant star. The children turned to see a soft glow at the very end of the garden, which grew larger and larger until it took on a shape that they recognized. The book. The book of the source, speeding toward them on its golden pedestal. It stopped just before it about crashed into them, hovering for a moment before gently setting itself down on the ground. The golden cover projected the image of the crest of a Hortus, which rotated slowly in midair. The book opened, and the pages began to turn, making a soft, tinkling music that appeared as tiny sparks of light in the air. Then the pages stopped turning, and the words floated up from the page, forming themselves into a sentence. You have not been given fear, but power. You have not been given fear, but power. So these things have power? Manuel asked, gazing down at his innocent-looking water lily bulb. Evan looked down at the dirty rock in his hand, wondering how it could be powerful. The worst it could do was break a window if he threw it hard enough, and the flower bulb and root seemed equally unpowerful. Yet he knew that the tiny seeds they had been given before from this very garden had grown into mighty shields when they had raised them up in their fists. Evan gripped the rock and raised his arm in the air to see if the rock would do something. It didn't. Are we going on a mission now? He asked. The time is not yet, Ruach said. But we only have 40 days, right? Said Manuel, or technically 36 days. The time is not yet, Ruach said again. Rue, said Brianna, I just found out that Mr. J.R. is in the hospital. Is he sick? Can you make him better? What's wrong with Mr. J.R.? said Evan, alarmed. I don't know. He had surgery. Surgery? Maybe it was just something easy to fix, like an appendectomy, said Evan. Appendectomy? Manuel corrected. He frowned. If it was something like that, Levi would have told us. He turned toward Ruach and said in a soft, trembling voice, Is Mr. J.R. really sick, like my mom was? Ruach was silent for a moment. James will fulfill his mission, he said finally, in a voice so faint the warriors almost missed it, as will all who serve the source with their whole hearts. Evan's brow furrowed, and he scrunched up his nose, displeased with how vague Ruach seemed to be at the moment. When can we see him? Evan asked impatiently. The source, I mean. Why can't we see him in person? Ruach's hooded head nodded slightly. You already have.